Round the World Lit Audio. Candide by Voltaire. Episode 3. Chapters 13 to 18. Full narration script. Channel intro. Welcome to Around the World Lit Audio, the greatest novels ever written, from every corner of the world, in English. New chapter every week, free to listen. Chapter recap. In Episode 2, the bent old woman led Candide to a house in Lisbon, where Cunégonde was sitting on a sofa, alive, having survived the Bulgarian soldiers, and the alternating schedule of a Grand Inquisitor and a Jewish merchant. 2 men were killed in the apartment. A carriage was taken south to Cadiz. On the ship crossing the Atlantic, the old woman told her story: daughter of a pope, pirates, Morocco, slavery, the siege of Azov, and her conclusion that she has always loved life, which she calls the most ridiculous weakness in the human creature. Candide is finding Pangloss' philosophy increasingly difficult to maintain. He does not yet have an alternative. Episode 3. Chapters 13 through 18. Chapter 13. How Candide was obliged to part from the fair Cunégonde and the old woman. South America received them. They arrived in Buenos Aires, where the governor was a man of such extraordinary self-regard that his full name, Don Fernando de Barra y Figueroa y Mascarnes y Lampardos y Souza, had expanded to fill the space his ego required. He received them. He saw Cunégonde. He wanted Cunégonde. He asked if she was Candide's wife. Candide said yes. He asked again, with more emphasis. The old woman, reading the situation with her customary accuracy, took Candide aside and said, "Say no. Say she is your sister. Governors always want what they cannot have. Say she is your sister, and he will want her more and pursue the matter more formally, and this will give us time to arrange things." Candide said no. He said, "I cannot lie about Cunégonde. She is my companion. I love her. I intend to marry her." The old woman looked at him, with the expression of someone observing a principled decision being made in circumstances where principles are a luxury. Then a messenger arrived. The messenger brought news from Lisbon. The authorities were looking for the man who had killed the Grand Inquisitor and Don Issachar. There was a description. The description was accurate. Candide was, in a very specific administrative sense, wanted for 2 murders in 2 countries. The old woman assessed this new information with the speed of a woman who has been assessing situations for a long time, and has become very fast at it. She said to Candide, "Go, now, into the interior. We will follow, when it is safe." Candide went. He went with his valet Cacambo, a man of mixed ancestry, who had been born in South America, and knew it with the comprehensive familiarity of someone for whom it was not an adventure but a landscape. Cacambo was, like the old woman, consistently the most practically useful person in whatever scene he occupied. He was cheerful, resourceful, multilingual, and entirely without the philosophical commitments that made Candide and Pangloss occasionally inefficient. They fled into the interior. Chapter 14. How Candide and Cacambo were received by the Jesuits of Paraguay. The interior of Paraguay contained, among other things, a Jesuit settlement. The Jesuits of Paraguay had established, in the 18th century, a network of settlements, reductions, in which the indigenous population lived under Jesuit governance, somewhat protected from the worst excesses of Spanish colonial exploitation, in an arrangement that was simultaneously genuinely benevolent by the standards of the time, and also an exercise of complete control, by an organization that believed it knew better than everyone what was good for everyone. Candide and Cacambo arrived at a Jesuit settlement. The officer at the gate said, "The father commandant does not speak to anyone. He is busy." Cacambo said, "Tell him we are from Westphalia. Tell him Candide wishes to speak with him about an urgent family matter." The officer went away. He came back. He said, "You may enter." The father commandant was the Baron's son, Cunégonde's brother, who had been reported dead at the castle when the Bulgarian soldiers arrived. He was not dead. He had been wounded and left for dead and then nursed back to health by a Jesuit, and had entered the order and had risen through it, with the specific effectiveness of a man of good family, who has found a hierarchical structure that suits his temperament. He and Candide embraced. The reunion was genuine on both sides. 2 young men who had known each other in the best of all possible castles, and had both, through different routes, ended up in Paraguay. They sat and ate together and caught up on the years between. Then Candide mentioned that he intended to marry Cunégonde. The Baron's son said, "You will do no such thing." He said it with complete calm, the calm of a man stating an obvious fact. He said, "My sister does not marry a commoner. She may have lost her castle. She may have been through things I would prefer not to think about, but she does not marry a commoner. It is a question of birth. It is not negotiable." Candide said, "But I love her, and she has been through considerable suffering, and I have been through considerable suffering on her behalf, and we are in Paraguay." The Baron's son said, None of these are relevant to the question of birth. Candide hit him, not with the sword immediately. He argued first, at some length, making points that were reasonable and went nowhere, and then reached for the sword in the specific frustration of a man whose reasonable points have been received as though they were not reasonable at all. The Baron's son reached for his as well. There was a fight. At its conclusion the Baron's son was injured, not dead, but definitively unable to continue the conversation. Cacambo, who had been waiting outside and had heard the noise, and assessed it correctly, appeared at the door. He said, "We need to go." They went. Chapter 15. How Candide killed the brother of his dear Cunégonde. They went into the deeper interior, fleeing the Jesuits now as well as the authorities in Lisbon, moving through jungle and terrain that Cacambo navigated, with the ease of someone who has done this before and knows that jungles, properly understood, are less dangerous than the people in them. They encountered a tribe. The tribe, the Oreillons, had captured 2 women who were being chased by 2 monkeys. Candide, operating on the assumption that chased women are women who need help, shot the monkeys. The women turned out to be the monkeys' companions rather than their prey, and the tribe, observing that Candide had killed 2 companions of the tribe's companions, formed the opinion that Candide was a Jesuit and should be eaten. Cacambo negotiated. He negotiated in the local language, which he spoke, because Cacambo spoke everything, and he explained that Candide was not a Jesuit, but had in fact just killed a Jesuit, which was the kind of credential that the Oreillons could appreciate. They verified this. They confirmed it. They let them go. They continued. Chapter 16. What happened to the 2 travelers with 2 girls, 2 monkeys, and the savages? Having narrowly avoided being eaten, Candide reflected on the philosophical implications. He said, "There are parts of this journey that Pangloss' framework does not accommodate easily." Cacambo said, "We should keep moving." They kept moving. Chapter 17. Rival of Candide and his valet in the country of El Dorado, and what they saw there. They found El Dorado by accident. This was, on reflection, probably the only way El Dorado could be found, not by the systematic expeditions that Europeans had been sending into South America for 2 centuries, with their maps and their soldiers, and their specific conviction that a city of gold existed and could be located by sufficient application of force and determination, but by accident, by 2 travelers who had run out of directions and had gone in the last remaining one, which happened to be the right one. El Dorado was real. It was. Voltaire describes it with the specific relish of a man who has been waiting for this moment. A city of extraordinary beauty and prosperity, in which the streets were paved with gold and precious stones because gold and precious stones were what the streets were made of and nobody had thought to make them of anything else, because in El Dorado gold and precious stones were simply common materials without special value. The people of El Dorado were content. They were content in the specific way of people who have everything they need and have organized their society without the mechanisms that produce discontent elsewhere, without priests who claim special authority, without courts that punish, without poverty that breeds desperation, without the constant pressure of a social hierarchy that requires everyone to be either above or below someone else. They ate well. They laughed. They were kind to Candide and Cacambo with the genuine, unperformative kindness of people who are not being kind because it is required of them but because it is what they are. Candide walked through El Dorado and thought, "This is the best of all possible worlds." He said this to Cacambo. Cacambo said, "Yes, it appears to be." Candide walked through El Dorado for a month. Then he said, "I want to leave." Cacambo looked at him. He said, "You want to leave El Dorado?" Candide said, "I want to find Cunégonde. I want to be back in the world. I want," he paused, working out what he wanted, "I want to be somewhere that matters. Even if it is worse than here. Even if it is considerably worse than here." He said, "Paradise does not hold me. I think I am constitutionally unsuited for it." This was, in its way, the most honest thing Candide had said since the novel began. The king of El Dorado received them, and listened to their intention to leave with the polite puzzlement of a man who genuinely cannot understand why someone would choose to leave El Dorado. He asked questions. The answers he received were not, from his perspective, entirely satisfying, but he was a good king, and he respected the wishes of his guests, and he arranged, with considerable generosity, for them to be sent on their way. They left El Dorado with enough gold and jewels to buy several kingdoms. They went back into the world. Chapter 18. What they saw in the country of El Dorado, continued, and the interview with the good old man. Before leaving El Dorado, Candide spoke with an old man, who was 172 years old and who had, in that time, developed opinions about the world that were specific and considered. The old man said, "We have a rule in El Dorado. We do not pray to God asking for things. We simply thank Him for what we have. A God, who needs to be asked for things is a God with insufficient knowledge of what his creation requires, and we do not believe our God is like that. He said, we also do not have priests. We are all priests. The whole country is a priest. He said, the countries beyond our mountains are, I am told, places of considerable suffering and injustice. We have chosen not to engage with them, which is why they have not found us, and why they are not likely to find us. The desire to be left alone, maintained consistently over several centuries, is more effective than any wall. Candide listened to this and thought about the Jesuits, and the Inquisition, and the wars, and the earthquake, and the Bulgarian army, and all of the things he had encountered in the countries beyond the mountains. He said, you are very wise. The old man said, we have had a long time to think about things and no wars to interrupt the thinking. This helps. They departed El Dorado. The gold and jewels they carried were enough to make them, by the standards of the world outside, extraordinarily wealthy. By the standards of El Dorado they were carrying what the streets were made of. Candide was going back to find Cunégonde. He was going back into the world. He had been in paradise and had chosen to leave it because paradise, without the person he loved, was insufficient. This was either the most romantic thing in the novel or the most foolish, and Voltaire, characteristically, declined to specify which. Chapter transition. You have reached the end of episode 3 of Candide, by Voltaire. Chapters 13 through 18. El Dorado was real and Candide left it voluntarily to go back to the world. In episode 4, the world receives him with its customary enthusiasm. The gold is lost. The philosophers multiply. Candide encounters more suffering, now with more money to lose and more experience of the gap between what the world is and what Pangloss said it was. And he gets considerably closer to Cunégonde. Episode 4 is available next week. Subscribe to Around the World Lit Audio so you never miss a chapter. A new episode arrives every week.